Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to be talking about my 5 favorite baits for fall bass fishing. I have them tied on every time I go somewhere, so let's talk about it. And if you're new to my channel, go ahead down below and hit the subscribe button for me. It would be greatly appreciated. I'm trying to reach at least 1,000 subscribers, so if you could help me out with that, I would really appreciate it, and you won't miss any more of my bass fishing tips or tricks. So let's get into my 5 favorite baits, and let's see what they are. We'll talk about rod, reel, line, and how you can adjust them based on what water you're fishing, if it's dirty or clear. So let's talk about it. Number one that I'm going to be throwing in the fall, I always have a crankbait tied on. A crankbait is a lure that I always have tied on for fall bass fishing. This one right here is a build crankbait, but I will throw a lipless crankbait if I'm fishing a lake that has a lot of grass, and you can rip it free from the grass. I throw this mid-depth crankbait when I'm trying to get it out just a little bit further on those rocky banks, maybe cranking around bridges and stuff like that has a little bit more depth of water to it. Or if I'm fishing way back in some creeks, then I'll go to a square bill crankbait. As for color selection, if the water's dirty, I'll pick a chartreuse black, chartreuse blue, something like that, something with a little bit of bright color to it. Other than that, pretty much a white, a pearl, a shad pattern, anything like that. The fish in the fall are mainly keyed in on shad. If for some reason you're at a lake and you know they're eating crawfish, you're catching them, they're spitting up crawfish, then throw a red or an orange color as well. But I tend to stick to more the shad patterns in the fall time. Especially on the lakes that I fish, they have a lot of shad in them, so that's the main forage of the bass this time of year. For line, I'm going to choose a fluorocarbon line to get it down a little bit deeper in the water, get your crankbait to your max depth. If you're fishing a lot of heavy cover, I'll go up to 15-pound test. It'll take about a foot or two off your diving depth, but you can really get it up into some thick cover and get the fish out, banging it off of wood and logs and stuff like that, or even some like really chunky rock. 12-pound is usually my mainstay. That's about what I throw on all my crankbaits. Occasionally I'll go down to 10-pound if I want to get it a little bit deeper, but for the most part I stick to 12-pound test almost entirely. For the rod and reel, this is a 6:3:1 gear ratio reel. I picked the mid gear ratio so you can still reel kind of fast if they want it burned, but you can also slow it down a little bit. Once that water starts cooling off, they're not going to want to move as fast. I'll even go to a flat-sided crankbait that time of year and fish it really slow, and you can still get bites when the water's down into the mid 40s, upper 40s. And then for the rod, I'm just going to throw a regular 7-foot medium heavy, but this is a composite rod. This one has a little bit of glass in it, but I also have some that are just straight fiberglass composite that have that real moderate bend to it. So it's a medium heavy, moderate action rod. It'll just make sure that you can get the fish loaded up on these crankbait hooks, and they can just fight and pull, and as long as you play them slow, they won't usually come off. Just make sure you get the most amount of fish in the boat that you can fishing with a crankbait. Fish are known to come off on treble hooks, so that's why I go with the moderate action rod. And for all the gear that I'm going to talk about today, it'll all be listed in the description below if you want to check any of this out. I'll mention some specific bait names and types, but for the most part it'll all be down in the description for you to check out. This crankbait right here is a Spro Fat Papa. I have a ton of other Spro crankbaits. I'll throw the Little John MDs, I'll throw the regular Little Johns, just any type of mid-diving crankbait. A rock crawler is a good one this time of year. The DT6, the DT10 from Rapala, those are the type of crankbaits that I'm going to throw this time of year. Unless I'm fishing up shallow, really shallow, then I'm going to go to like a Strike King 1.5 KVD. But that's it for my crankbait setup. That's going to be the #1 bait that I throw. They're feeding on shad. I can cover a ton of water, and it imitates what they're eating the best, and it's just a really good way to find fish fast. So this is going to be the #1 bait that I throw whenever I'm going to a lake in the fall time. So let's get into number 2. The second bait that I always throw when I go to a lake, no surprise, another shad pattern. It's actually going to be a spinnerbait this time. If you're fishing a grass lake again, you can go to a chatterbait instead. And rip it through the grass, but if you're fishing a lot of wood and rocks, this comes through the wood a lot better than a chatterbait will, because the chatterbait will hit the wood and then flip over and it hooks into it. This the arm almost acts as a weed guard, so you can fish it through a lot of wood like that. Colors on a spinnerbait is going to be really simple. I'm going to throw this chartreuse and white anytime that I'm fishing dirty water, and then I'm going to throw a solid white with all nickel blades or silver blades whenever I'm fishing clean water. And that's about it. You can throw a trailer hook if you're missing some fish. If you can feel them biting it, they're not getting hooked. Or if you want to try and get a little bit bigger of a bite, you can throw like a 3.3 or 3.8 Kitech on the back of this, and it'll just make it a little bit bigger profile and give them something to target rather than just the blades. So you can switch it up throwing that as well. Line for my spinnerbait, I'm going to throw 15-pound test fluorocarbon almost entirely. If I'm fishing some really heavy cover or I want to keep my spinnerbait up, I'll throw 17 or 20, but I almost exclusively throw 15-pound test fluorocarbon on a spinnerbait. And for weight sizes, I'm going to have a 3/8 and a half. Occasionally, I'll go to a 3/4, but for the most part, I'm sticking with that almost a half ounce. If you wanted to pick one spinnerbait, a half ounce would be where I would go. You can fish it down deeper if you reel it slow enough, and if you reel it a little bit faster, you can fish it as shallow as you want. And speaking of reeling it faster, I'm going to throw it on a 7:1 gear ratio reel. So if I want to reel it faster and get it over logs or fish it up really shallow, I can. This will go shallower than the crankbait will, so you can fish it as shallow as you want. That's why I choose the 7:1, and a lot of times they'll bite it and run right at you. And then I'm also going to throw this on like a 7'3" or 7-foot medium heavy rod. You want a little bit of tip for when those fish bite it. You want it to have a little bit of give so they can get the hook in their mouth, but you need that backbone to be able to set the hook in. It's not like a crankbait. You have a single hook on there, and all you have to do is pull that thing right into their mouth. Once you get it through, it's one hook. They're usually not coming off. That's why I like throwing a spinnerbait a lot more when I know I'm around some fish, and I'm not going to get a lot of bites, because if you do get a bite on this versus the crankbait, you're going to land more fish on the spinnerbait than you will the crankbait. I throw this in almost entirely around wood that's up on the bank, a lot of laydowns and stuff like that. You can cover a lot of water and fish a lot of laydowns and see if they're up in the laydowns by throwing this spinnerbait, and you can always follow up with a slower moving bait in those laydowns later. But this helps me cover a ton of water, imitates the shad really well in the backs of those creeks where those fish are living in the fall time. So spinnerbait is always going to be my second pick when going to a lake in the fall. My third choice for fishing in the fall is going to be, I'm going to give a category of baits because you can change it up if you like, but it's going to be a topwater. I have a buzzbait tied on here. I think this is a Zorro head knocker with a horny toad on it. I take the skirts off and just throw the horny toads. It gives them a really good target to hit. And then I'll cover a ton of water with this. The only exception with this is those spinnerbait and crankbait, you can fish a lot colder water temperature. This you can only fish down to about like 60, maybe 55 degrees, depending on how active the fish are. Once it starts getting that cold, they're going to stop biting the topwater. So this is an earlier fall bait. When I'm picking a topwater, I almost always pick a moving bait. I don't pick like a popper or a frog or something like that unless I'm fishing a grass lake or trying to hit specific targets. More likely, I'm going to throw a buzzbait or a spook or even a whopper plopper. You can cover a ton of water, you can cast it out, reel it in, cover a ton of water, and see where those fish are. A lot of fall fishing is all about covering as much water as you can to find where they're at, and a lot of times they'll be few and far between. So you might catch one fish on a log over here, cover 300 yards more bank, and then catch another fish on another log over there. And it's not like you're going to find a bank that's just loaded with fish and they're going to keep coming to you like in the pre-spawn or something like that. You're going to have to cover a ton of water to find some fish, and you might get a few bites here and there, and they're resident fish that live up there or ones that are up there waiting to feed, and then they're going to go back out to the main lake when they're done and it gets too cold for them back there. For a rod, I'm going to throw a 7-foot to a 7'6" medium heavy. This is a 7'6" medium heavy. That's just what I had it tied up on. I'm always going to throw a braid somewhere between like 30 and 40, maybe even 50-pound braid, depending on what I'm fishing. You can throw it on fluorocarbon because it sinks anyway, so you don't need it for like a walking bait where the braid keeps it up on top of the water. I just like braid because it gives me a direct connection and I can set the hook really well with this. So I'll throw usually 30-pound braid and a 7-foot medium heavy rod, and then a 7:1 gear ratio reel because you're going to need a fast reel to keep it up on top of the water. If you want, you can throw 20-pound fluorocarbon on the same setup and it'll do just fine. For the topwater walking bait like a spook, I'll always throw 30-pound braid and the 7:1 gear ratio, and I'll go down to a medium action rod because it has treble hooks on it. My fourth pick for the fall is actually going to be a jig. And you can see right here, this is a flipping jig. It has a 3/0 hook in it, extra heavy wire. This is a 1/2 ounce, but it's very small. I just have a little chunk trailer on there. So I almost call it like a finesse. I mean, it is a finesse flipping jig. So like a Ike's mini flip jig, or the Riot Baits Minima jig, I think it's called. This is a custom made. I made it myself. If you'd like to see a video on how I make these jigs, go ahead and leave a comment down below for me, and I'll do one this winter of how I make these little baby flipping jigs out of a do-it mold. This is going to be when the fish are feeding on crawfish. You're going to want this bait when they're feeding up around the laydowns, trying to eat crawfish. There's sometimes when they're not going to eat the shad, or like a bass will eat anything that can come by it. So if it's living in a laydown and you want to catch them flipping, then you can catch them on the jig. Colors, I'm going to go black and blue if the water's dirty, and then I'm going to go with a green pumpkin if the water's a little bit cleaner. And then I'll throw either a 3/8 if I'm fishing really shallow water, or this is a 1/2 ounce, so I can cover a ton of water with it. It falls fast. I can cover a bunch of laydowns, flip, bring it back in, flip, bring it back in, make a ton of flips with it until I find the fish. And then for line, I'm always going to use 20-pound fluorocarbon. I don't use anything else with my jigs. I'm flipping it into really heavy cover. I don't want to break off, so I'll always throw 20-pound fluorocarbon on my jig rod. And this is on a 7'3" heavy action rod. This is actually, like I said, it has that meaty hook in it, like that thick hook, extra heavy. So you're gonna want a heavier rod so you can really drive that hook in and not lose a fish. So you have to get it through the weed guard, through the fish's mouth, extra wire hook. So I'll go with the heavy action on this jig rod. And I'll usually throw a 7:1 gear ratio. This is actually an 8:1 that I had. Same thing pretty much, just a fast gear ratio reel is what you're going to want to use. And you're going to use this to cover a lot of those laydowns, or even isolated cover. A lot of times when they draw down a lake, they'll brush piles that are usually out in like 6, 7, 8 foot of water. When they draw the lake down, they're up in like 2 foot of water. So you can go flip those brush piles that are usually you're dragging a worm through, or throwing a crankbait around, or a football jig or stuff like that. You can physically see them sticking up out of the lake, and you can go flip to those brush piles, and a lot of times those fish will just live on them year round, or at least until the winter, and they'll stay there and eat shad as they come by, or crawfish if they happen to be there. So that's the jig that I would use. I pick a jig because you always got to have a slow bait on, even if it's fall. A lot of times they might not be chasing the spinnerbait or the crankbait or eating a topwater, so you can find an area with those baits and then slow down. You might even catch more or bigger ones with the jig. So that's why I picked that for my number 4 bait. And for my final bait, this is going to be something that you may see sometimes. I was throwing a lot in my Florida videos. It is just a simple trick worm on a Texas rig, light Texas rig. I think this is a 1/4 or 3/16 ounce, a pegged bobber stop weight, a 3/0 hook, and then whatever color trick worm you want. Green pumpkin and clearer water, black and blue June bug, straight black, anything like that, and some dirtier water. And if you have really clean water, you can go to like watermelon or watermelon red. This is going to be, instead of throwing like a Senko or something slow falling, this is going to still allow me to cover water. I'm going to throw it in the same places I'm throwing the jig, or just picking off like little laydowns that are on the bank, or little sticks or brush piles, pitching around those. This is just a really finesse way to get them to bite. Again, even though it's fall time and these fish are feeding up, they're not always going to just be eating everything that's in the water. I mean, some days it's going to be tough to get them to bite, and when it's tough to get them to bite, that's when I'm going to go to this trick worm. It's a really finesse way to flip around, but you can still cover water, and it's just like flipping a jig. As for the line on this setup, I'm going to go with 15 to maybe 17 pound fluorocarbon. If you're fishing really heavy cover, you can go up to 20 pound, but I like to stick with 15. It's just going to get you more bites, and you're usually fishing some pretty sparse cover with this. It's not like you're going to be throwing it in the middle of a brush pile like a jig. It just doesn't work that way. It's not going to fall right through it. You're going to fish around the edges of this stuff that you've been fishing with the jig. I'm going to throw a 7:1 gear ratio reel, and you still want that fast reel. A lot of times they're going to bite it and they're going to swim right at you, so you're going to have to catch up to them, set the hook hard, and get them in the boat. And then I'm going to throw a 7-foot medium heavy rod. You still want the tip to make that accurate cast, but you need the backbone of that 7-foot medium heavy to get that hook in them and get them in the boat. but I don't go up to like a heavy or anything like that on this rod. Just a 7-foot medium heavy and a 7:1 gear ratio reel with 15-pound test fluorocarbon. I promise you, if you throw this trick worm around, this Texas rig trick worm, I've been doing it all year in Florida, back in Pittsburgh, other places I've been fishing. It is deadly. A lot of people are flipping beavers and everything like that. This is something that these fish don't see. You can still flip it in the same areas, but it's a worm rather than a beaver, and I swear it'll get you more bites than you've ever seen before flipping a beaver in some of these same areas, or even a jig. Everyone throws a jig and a beaver when they see a brush pile or a lay down, so a lot of times I'll go behind them with this trick worm, and you'll catch a lot more fish behind some people. I hope you enjoyed these tips on my 5 favorite fall baits to catch some bass with. I have them tied on every time I go somewhere. They're my go-tos. I pretty much cover a ton of water with it and try and get as many bites as I can with that trick worm and that jig once I find a good area. I hope you can use them on the places that you've been fishing. As always, the links will be provided in the description below for all the products that I'm using, so if you want to check them out. And if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up for me, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any more of my bass fishing tips or videos. Thanks for watching.